Welcome and thank you all for joining us today on our second webinar, How to Build Your Asset Management Team with Ruth Wallsgrove, part of the AMCL USA webinar series. My name is Andrea Sinova, your moderator. Due to the amount of attendees today, we'll be answering key questions at the end of this presentation. Today, we are not enabling the raise hand option. Instead, please type your questions in the questions box at any point during the presentation. If we are unable to answer your questions due to time restraints, we will answer the rest by email after the presentation. I am available to walk you through any technical difficulties through the chat box. Know that you can switch from your computer audio to your phone audio on the GoToWebinar panel if you're having any trouble with audio. If you're going through your Windows or your Mac, you can go to your audio tab of the GoToWebinar, and under phone call, you can switch from phone number, access code, and audio pin. And also you can choose for your computer audio through your mic and speakers. If you're using the GoToWebinar app, there is an icon that you can under the lower toolbar, and you can see the audio options, as well as if you're using your Android device, there is a 3-dot option, and on your upper toolbar, and select the audio option from the menu. I'll now hand it over to Ruth.
Thank you, Andres. I hope everybody can at least see the slides, and maybe it's a good or bad thing if you can see me as well. Okay, so this is one of our series. Today we're talking about building your asset management team. AMCL is essentially a dedicated asset management consultancy. That is, asset management is all we do. We do it around the world on 5 different continents and across different sectors. And all sorts of, we work with all kinds of people. And of course, we've supported lots of teams. So this is based on that. I've built my own team. Sorry, that's I've built my own asset management team and run it when I was in Sydney. But I've also worked and continue to work with a lot of organisations in North America on building their teams. And last year, I co-wrote a guide to building an asset management team, which is available for free, and I'll give you the link at the end if you'd like a copy. Co-wrote it with Lou Cripps of RTD in Denver. Okay, so today we're going to look very briefly at some asset management fundamentals. This isn't intended to be an introduction to asset management, but just to remind us what it is that asset management's all about. Then we're going to move to what won't happen if we don't have the resources to do it. I think my real theme for today is there's lots to be said about who to hire and business cases, all kinds of useful stuff that it's good to discuss. But I think the fundamental thing is that instituting asset management is actually hard work, and it actually requires resources. And I'm not sure the asset management community itself has always made it very clear to say senior management that if you have no resources, you don't get anywhere in asset management. That's not necessarily fatal. I mean, if you don't have many resources, then it's a matter of going more slowly. But we shouldn't underestimate how much it really takes to completely transform our organizations. And then going to look at what are some recommended steps, the steps 1 to 4, if you were starting from scratch. I'm hoping this will also be useful to people who are right in the middle of it, not just people who are starting a team from scratch. And then we have at the end, depending on how much time and what people are interested in, there are sort of frequently asked questions, frequently encountered challenges that we can go through. But I would encourage you, while we go through this, do type any question or comment or on additional resources, anything you'd like to recommend, in the question box so that my colleagues will pick it up and we will come to them at the end. Okay, so first of all, the basics, I think, is that we aren't starting from scratch in our organisations, of course, with assets. We've managed assets for thousands of years. We have some extremely knowledgeable and committed people, especially in the field and with engineering, who really understand their assets, who care about their assets. We're very good at fixing them when they break. We're increasingly sophisticated about understanding what they're going to cost to build. We are increasingly good at maintenance and some very, very good maintenance practice in the world. And that focus on making sure that the assets deliver today. I think the point here is if we weren't good at that, we wouldn't still be here. So most of our organisations are actually pretty good at that. We have all these, I'm going to say pockets, but I don't mean that in a rude way. We have some experts, we have some experience, we have some knowledge that we can build on. Because what asset management really is building on what we have already, but with the emphasis now on a few things which we haven't been so good at. Thinking about the longer term, the integrated system, the costs and efforts and risks across the life cycle. So asset management is really trying to put us on the front foot rather than always being on the back foot. And it's very much a theme of integration and coordination. But we're still dependent on all those people and all those things we've learnt in hundreds or thousands of years looking after assets. We don't replace that. So the major thing here that I want to say is that, as I said, it's work to do. It's not just a little bit more of the same. Asset management actually in the end requires a change of culture, that we can think longer term, that we can think system-wide, that we're really integrated across the life cycle. Not just tinkering around the edges, it's not more of the same. So that's managing assets and asset management. I'm not going to go through this in detail. I hope some of you will already know it. It's the six-box model, or the conceptual model of asset management. It's been widely adopted across the world. And I think what's strong about it is it does just point out all the different things that are involved in asset management. It's not just about data, it's not just about technology, it's not just about decision techniques. It's about the whole framework, in which not only have we got coordinated strategy and planning, but we also are taking account of risk, and that we understand the role of people. I mean, one thing here is that despite what some people might think, we're not about to be replaced by robots anytime soon in the world of asset management, because our asset systems are just simply far too complicated to really be run by a box. They're still completely dependent on experienced and knowledgeable people at every part of the organisation, in particular on the ground, actually working with the assets. So bearing in mind that we have to bring all of this together, it's clear that this isn't just something one person at a desk in a little corner can do on their own. Asset management isn't about that. Well, we do have people who can sit at a desk and think very clever thoughts about a particular asset. And they certainly have their part. But that's not what asset management is. Asset management is bringing it all together. And in particular, asset management is about the idea of optimizing, always thinking in the decisions we're making on our assets. What is this going to mean for performance? What's it going to cost? What kind of risk level is it going to give us now and into the future? So this is a kind of common picture in an asset management presentation is it's all about balancing cost, risk and performance. But it's worth pointing out that this is actually slightly more complicated than we perhaps managed our assets in the past. That if we are truly optimizing, we're going to have to think more in a more strategic and pointed way, because the same asset in two different places might actually require a different strategy, because so there are more people affected by it, and it also varies over time. So it's not just a matter of just following what the standards say. Asset management is very much not just, although it's built on understanding our assets and good technical standards, it goes beyond that to actually think of a dynamic optimization as we go through time. And what's more, that triangle of optimization, at the very least, requires that we're bringing different kinds of skills together, different kinds of expertise and perspectives. If we want to balance cost, risk, and performance, it means at the very least, finance, engineering, operations, and maintenance all need to be at the table. And what asset management is really, I mean, I probably say this more than once today, what it really is bringing them together, is making sure that we not only have the processes, but we also have the dialogue, and we even have the culture that people will share knowledge, will ask questions of other people who know things they don't, that we get together around the table and think more proactively about our assets going forward. So, and you know that if it's about bringing people together, it's got a level of complication that, if you like, pure technology may not, on its own, may not have. All right, so I'm not going to say too much about this because to me, why do asset management? What's the positive case for the benefits of asset management is incontrovertible, is that companies around the world that do good asset management, they're not simply better run businesses. They have happier customers, better relationships with regulators, they make more profit, they save more money. Because if you're an infrastructure organization, better asset management means you're a better run organization. It means you know what's happening with your assets and you know what you want out of them. So at some level, it's very simple to say, if you want to manage your assets well, if you want to get what you need for the customers, you have to do good asset management. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. We can always come back to it at the end, because for some people, the issue will be, how do I make a business case for an asset management team? And there's plenty of evidence from around the world of exactly what it will give your organization. I have to say here also what will happen if you don't do it, because that's a whole other story as well. So for me, it's clear that good asset management is a good thing if you're an infrastructure organization. The really important thing here, though, it's not magic. It's not just one technology or a piece of data. It's about everybody making good decisions day in, day out at every level in the organization in a coordinated way. It's not magic. There's no silver bullet. It takes real work with hearts and minds as well as other things, to actually change an organization so it can honestly say that it's optimizing how it manages its assets to give the right service to customers at the right cost, at the right level of risk. So let's have a look in a bit more detail about what won't happen if you don't have some people to do the work. Now, I've said here, without some dedicated asset management resources, and I do feel quite strongly that part-time resources, meaning part-time somebody's got other jobs to do, doesn't seem to work very satisfactorily. But I think I mean dedicated in a second way, which if you don't have people who really care about asset management, who really think what they want to do is to make asset management happen in their organization, what won't happen if you don't have those people? So let's have a look at what asset management has to actually deliver. And I think there are three key things that an asset management team has to deliver to an organization. The first is the central heart of asset management is this integrated asset management planning process. Not just now, not just short term, but short term, medium and long term. Ideally, it was said right from the early days of asset management, we should be planning what we're going to do with our assets for at least 10 years. 5 years is short term, 1 year is not planning at all, really. So, and to do good integrated asset management planning, you need some other things around it. Six-box model is quite good on that. You need the right data, you need the right people around the table, you need to be thinking about risk, you need to be learning lessons. So there's quite a lot of work to actually coordinate, get the right processes in place, the right people around the table, facilitate this. I once asked the first really effective president of the Institute of Asset Management, very clever man, and now a CEO of a big power company in the UK. I asked him what was his number one thing he did. Sorry, I don't want that. What was the most important thing he did to implement asset management in the power company he worked for? And he said, without hesitation, getting my team of asset managers trained up in facilitation skills. So I think that's quite telling, and I've heard people say that since. So there's quite a lot of work in the planning, the coordinating, the facilitating, make sure we've got the right data, the right analysis, the right strategies. That's plenty to be getting on with. However, of course, we have some other things we have to do. If we have an asset management team, that's the focal point for project managing, essentially, the implementation of an asset management system or framework, making sure all those pieces are in place. Now, like the asset management planning, it's not assumed and it doesn't work, to think the asset management team does everything in the system. The asset management team will definitely be dependent on all sorts of other people, operations, maintenance, engineering, finance, doing their part to get the processes in place and documented and reviewed and working together. But again, it's that idea of coordinating it and project managing it. And that might be, of course, all the way to ISO 55000 compliance or certification. I need to just say in passing that getting certification isn't a huge job on top of doing the asset management system in the first place. ISO 55000 doesn't really ask you to do anything it shouldn't really be doing anyway. So it's a big initiative to get us to certification. And even if we don't go for certification, we've still got to think about that framework, making sure all the pieces are there, all the roles and responsibilities are clear, and all those processes are integrated. And if that wasn't bad enough, there's one third thing that an asset management team has to deliver an organization. It has to spearhead the change of culture. That is the attitudes towards alignment with our corporate objectives, towards working together, towards thinking system-wide, not just individual assets, and longer-term thinking. And that general motto of asset management, always asking, and then what? And then what happens next? If we don't do it, who would be doing it in our organization to make that change happen? Now, that, of course, takes us into the world of communication and change management, which is slightly unnerving for those of us with techie backgrounds. But the truth is, above all, that's what we actually have to make happen in our organizations if they're really going to manage their assets optimally. Okay, so these are things we have to deliver, and it all looks pretty big. Before anybody gets too worried, obviously you can start small. The more you know and the more you understand what's required, the easier it is, in fact, to work out small steps. If you're starting with a blank sheet of paper and you don't know how to start, this can be extremely hard. And we'll talk a little bit about what those steps might be. If you don't have many resources to begin with, you want to bootstrap. You want to get something in place so you can start the communication, you can start. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was saying, it's amazing how much, if you're a small team of asset management, you really are facilitating all the time. It's a lot of meetings, it's a lot of people to talk to, a lot of people to build relationships with. So we can start small as long as we understand what it's really going to take over the long run. Okay, just to say, asset management planning is the heart, I know, cheesy, the heart of not only asset management, actually if your infrastructure, say your power or buses or roads or water, it's asset management planning what we need to do to our assets to deliver to customers is really the heart of the business on which everything else should be of course, I'm an asset manager, so I would say this, but really when you look at it, asset management planning should be a central function in any infrastructure organization. And that's because, well, first of all, to get a good plan for the next 5, 10 years involves just about every department you can think of, not just engineering or finance, but also the people thinking about demand, the people who talk to customers, who understand risk, the maintenance and operations, just about everybody you can think of will have some role to play in making a good asset management plan. By definition, a good asset management plan must be deliverable. There's no prizes at all for a great plan you can't deliver. That's not feasible for your organization. But look at the other side. If we have this planning process, this integrated planning process, that's basically telling us what we need to do in all these areas, not just the capital program, not just the maintenance schedule, not just when do we need to have access to our assets through downtime, which for many people is a big issue, but also what people do we need, the issue of right sizing. If I know what work we have to do on the assets for the next 10 years, that we can turn very simply into how many maintenance people, how many operations, what kind of resources do we need on the capital side to do our replacements and renewals and our growth. It also allows us to then base our budgets on something solid, which instead of everybody shouting or whatever we call that particular process of who shouts loudest. It's actually, we can base our forward budgets on what we need to do. Now, we might not always get the money to do what we think we need to do, but we still need to be honest and face up to, actually, this is what we need to do if we want to maintain service for our customers. If we can't get the money, what are we going to do instead? Which, of course, is a very live issue at the moment. And then, of course, if we have a plan, we can plan other things around it, like what kind of contracts we need for equipment and materials. So you can start to see how this process of thinking about what we need to do really informs everything in our business. So it's central, and we shouldn't expect that it can happen on its own. We should expect that it really requires people working quite hard together. I have to say in passing, sooner rather than later, one of the things an asset management team really needs to spearhead is the modelling of understanding really what the relationship is, what we plan to do to our assets, what that's going to cost us to do the work, against what that actually delivers to the customers. And towards that day when we can say, if I have an extra dollar, where would I spend it? What impact would it have on the customers? If I have a dollar less than I thought, what's that impact going to be? Towards that understanding the relationship between what we do and what we get for the customers. And another thing about asset management, which actually is quite hard work, is that the whole point of it is to always be thinking about what we've got to deliver for the organisation as a whole. And that's called alignment to the goals of the organisation. It sounds innocent, but actually is quite hard to do. But it always makes me think of this quote from my co-author, which is that the chances of hitting a target you haven't specified or aren't aiming at is low. In other words, if we aren't clear about what all our projects and our maintenance are going to deliver, then the chances are they're not going to deliver what we need. So, and one thing I've learned, I've been in asset management for about 22 years, seems quite a long time, that asset management never happens by accident. Nothing in asset management happens by accident. If we don't positively optimize, we're suboptimal. If we don't positively align, the chances are we're going to trip up over our own feet. So the key questions for setting up an asset management team really have to include the following. How do you get enough knowledge about asset management and how to do it in the first place? If you're starting from scratch. Now, let me just give an example that some of you might recognize, that organizations can, senior management can hear there's this thing called asset management, maybe because the FDA tells them they've got to do it, but somebody says this asset management's a good thing to do. And sometimes what they do is they think, all right, who's the smart lad? All right, okay, we'll go to Joe and tap him or her on the shoulder and say, can you sort out asset management? Can you work out how we're going to transform the organisation with asset management on 20 hours a week? Of course, you still have to keep doing your line engineering design, but and the problem there is that there seems to be a mismatch between thinking asset management's really important and it needs to transform the organisation, but somehow we can do it without knowing anything about it. I hope you don't know what I'm talking about, but it seems a funny area. We probably wouldn't encourage people to start thinking about working on electricity wires or gas pipes or water treatment works without being sure that they actually knew what they were doing. But we seem to be a little bit more cavalier when it comes to asset management and think, okay, we can work this out. I'll look on the internet, won't find very much there, but how do we make sure to begin with we have a pretty good idea about what it is, what it's going to take, and how we need to progress it? So how do we get that knowledge in the first place if you're starting from scratch, even if you aren't? And the second question is, how do we get the resources to do the work based on the understanding of what the work really is? And you see how this relates to the previous point. What is it we're really going to have to do, and therefore what's that actually going to take us to do it? I think one issue I see quite commonly is that we tend to focus on the benefits, what the benefits of asset management are. without actually asking the question what it's going to take. And of course, that gives us an over-optimistic or just kind of unrealistic idea of how quickly we can do things. And then a third and related question is, how do you get the right people to do it? And what counts as not the right people? I'm not going to be rude about anybody in particular, but what kind of people do we need to get in place to do good asset management? And what things might trip us up as we go along if we don't ask the right questions about that? So that's what I'd like to look at. Proposed steps 1 to 4 in building an asset management team are, first of all, to get trained and tooled up. Secondly, to dedicate at least some resources. It doesn't have to be hundreds of people, but it needs to be somebody. Thirdly, what are we looking for in setting that team up? What kind of people, what kind of skills, what kind of experiences? I mean, in addition to asset management, do we really want? And then, of course, how to network so that we can learn from other people's experiences. I have to say that asset management is very, very largely still something that's passed on from person to person, whether it's at a conference or when somebody moves from one organisation to the next. There aren't a huge amount of good resources out there. I remember working with some Washington state utilities, and somebody said, we thought we'd look at the internet to see what we could find and read up about it, and then we'd know what to do. And they said there really wasn't very much there. And the situation hasn't got much better in the last few years. The very best way to work out what to do and what not to do is to talk to other asset managers. Okay, so let's have a look at each of those. First of all, what can I say? I think the problem here is however you do it, to be successful at asset management, you're going to have to spend some time learning about it. And given that doing it on the internet, I mean, I'm a great believer in Wikipedia. There are all sorts of amazing things there. One thing there isn't is how to do asset management. So I think the problem we have to start with is we can't implement anything in asset management if we don't understand it ourselves. And of course, we don't want to reinvent any wheels. It's extremely painful. There's some very good examples of people trying to reinvent asset management and then discovering only 5 or 10 years down the line that their next door neighbour had been doing it all along. That's the kind of thing a smart asset manager doesn't do. A smart asset manager asks, how is everybody else doing it? And I think that what this really means is, how do we tap into what's already there, the experiences around the world, that wider community? Obviously, a simple-ish way to do it is to get formal training. But the question is, how do I tap into that knowledge? And how do I tap into that knowledge in a fairly effective and fast way? Now, I'm very interested in people's comments on that. At the moment, we tend to think the easiest way is to go on a course. Of course, there aren't millions of courses, but that's one way of doing it. And if you do use any sorts of training, you want to kind of do it in this order. Get training for yourself if you haven't had it. Get training for the people you're going to use, the key people who are going to be responsible with you for making asset management happen. And thirdly, it's a very, very good idea to try to sneak in some training for your senior leadership. Now, not all senior leaders seem to think they need to. I don't know how to put it. I don't really understand how organizations go into asset management and how senior management can make good decisions about it until they really know what asset management is. And of course, asset management isn't taught at colleges. It's not just something you just grow up in. It's a new area of knowledge. I have to say that if we actually looked at North American organizations, and we look at those organizations where they did get senior management involved in training early on. So I work with, say, a couple of power companies, one of which the senior leaders who were going to be on the asset management steering committee actually went on a 5-day Institute of Asset Management certificate course, in other words, to get the first level of professional qualification in asset management. Another power organization I work with, puts everybody at all senior through at least a 3-hour briefing so that everybody knows a little bit about what the concepts mean and what's really involved in it. And it's staggeringly obvious which organisations that's happened and which ones they don't. The level of conversation with senior management in those organisations where senior management have bothered to put a bit of time into learning about asset management is so much more sophisticated than where they maybe, I suspect, think, this asset management stuff sounds all right, but I'm not that fussed. I'll just let Joe do it and get on with it. The problem is that that's not possible. Asset management isn't that kind of thing. Training, which doesn't have to be external training, it could even be stuff you set up internally. So, for example, I've worked with teams to train them up so they can deliver training, but a sort of formal bit of training or briefing or something like that, even lunch and learn sessions, is a fantastic way to communicate to everybody in the organisation both what we're talking about, what it requires, and their part in it. Because again, remember, they won't know that. It's not something they'll have read a book about. It's not something they'll have learned about in college. So something around training and briefing. It's not so much training on technical how to do things, but what are the key concepts? What are the key processes? So we need to find out what we need to do. Then the second step is that we do have to have that hard conversation about dedicated resources. And I said dedicated in the sense that they care about it, and ideally that they already know some stuff. They've got some experience or some training. What we said in building an asset management team was that essentially a good rule of thumb in life is that almost nothing is possible with a team of less than 3. One person on their own, it's an extraordinarily hard job to get anywhere in an organisation. And let's just also remind ourselves that if the organisation only thinks one part-time person is worth asset management, they're essentially saying that asset management's not worth very much. So it's a nasty double bind. But my rule of thumb is that you probably need 3 if you can do it. Now, obviously, you could be a small agency where that's not possible and you have to do what you can, in which case it would be, who else can I work with in the organisation who's sympathetic? And who your allies are is a very good question anyway. But essentially, if we think about the sheer amount of things we want in the end to do through asset management, it's very difficult if we don't have at least a small team to do it. All that coordination around planning and strategy and all the other enablers that allow to do good planning, project managing to actually get a quality asset management system in place, and then doing the work of communication and changing attitudes. So now I've talked with power companies, for example, where they're often separated in different business units, and the only practical way for them to do it is to have maybe one asset manager in each of the business units. I think that's a good place to start, and if that's politically where you are, you have to live with where you're starting. In practice, people usually come to the conclusion that they need more coordination and they need something more corporate one way or another. So we need to have the people in place to do some of the hard graft. Thirdly, of course, if we need the people, we have to ask the question of who should they be? I mean, I remember being asked, this is a few years ago, again from a utility on the West Coast, where they were looking at doing asset management, and they were looking to appoint internally, promote somebody to start looking at asset management, spearheading asset management. And they asked me, I mean, I was just there to talk a little bit about asset management, and the first question they said to me is, what kind of person, who would you recommend that we would put in charge of a small asset management team? And I was slightly caught off guard, but the first thing that came out of my mouth was they better be quite good with people, because they're going to have an awful lot of communication work to do. And the directors, the execs of this utility turned to each other and said, not the person we were thinking of then. Now, I never did find out who that was, but I suspect it was a very smart techie. And as soon as I said that most of the job will not be smart techiness, but actually working with other teams they could see that perhaps they needed to think again. I have to, I'm not going to say who they were, I have to say they picked a spectacularly good person who really did understand how to work with people. So I always feel that a sort of chalk up for a little bit of, but what kind of people? What kind of people do we need to lead the team? What kind of people do we need in the team? Now, this is something that Lou Cripps, who I wrote the guide with, came up with the idea of a platypus. I hope you all know what a platypus is. They're absolutely fabulous little creatures, a little bit endangered after the Australian wildfires, an Australian weird mammal. And they have, what's striking about platypuses is they have quite a strange combination of attributes. They're mammals, they're furry, they have what looks like a bird's bill, they lay eggs, they actually have venom, all sorts of things don't really seem to go together. So we used to say that perhaps the ideal asset management practitioner was a unicorn, in other words, didn't exist at all. And we decided no, we would use as our image the image of platypus. They do exist, they're pretty rare. There aren't actually any in North America at all, even in zoos, as far as I'm aware. But instead of trying to think of the perfect person with all these interesting and different attributes you might need, we need to look at how we build complementary teams. So let's have a look at what kind of things we're talking about. First of all, asset management is essentially a balance of technical and business. So we need to have that kind of balance in the team of interest and knowledge. We do need people who are good system and structured thinkers, good analysts. We need people who can think longer term, so people are not just immediately wanting to do things, but can also think longer term perspective. We need emotional intelligence and communication skills. Now, not necessarily in everybody, but we need it somewhere in the team. We need it somewhere in our efforts to do asset management. Asset management is very largely about planning for the future, and that means that it's dealing with uncertainty. So we need to have people who are comfortable with risk and probabilistic and scenario thinking. Not every engineer's favorite subject at college is statistics and probability. There's no real getting away from it in asset management. We put it that you need openness to change because we're going to have to be spearheading that change, but we're not just looking at novelty for its own sake. It's not just about bright new shiny things, whether they're new assets or new software tools or new techniques. We want a bit more, what are we actually going to do with these tools? And last, and certainly not least, we need enough leadership skills to get the rest of the organization to buy into asset management. Now, I think there's a whole other conversation about how we develop in ourselves those leadership skills. But basically, what we're aiming for is to have a complementary set of these skills, or at least a kind of willingness to go there. What doesn't work so well? Well, there's a few different things. If we approach it as a technical problem, we probably won't succeed. We've got a lot of good techies around. You know that if you need something technical, there's probably somebody in your organization you can get to help with it. But an asset management team that's too technically focused, well, it's a nice saying here, which is looking kind of inward and down. In the end, you've got to look up and out as an asset manager. No people skills available is a problem. And we may not be looking at a group of people who are all that keen on talking to other people. And it doesn't help to be too innocent. I mean, I think of asset managers as good people, but you have to realize you are dealing with a real organization and including some of the politics of it. This was a fabulous quote from another power company, where one business unit had done asset management and they were advising the other business units. And the guy actually said, the first thing out, he said, if we had our time again to implement asset management, we'd have one person, even just one, who actually liked talking to other people. He wouldn't have to be good at it, just prepared to do it. Okay, and then the last step, well, not the last step, the fourth is that is keying into other people and networks. And there are a lot of questions which we probably won't answer them all today, that once you start thinking about a team, things that you need to look at: how we're going to answer it, where is it going to be, what kind of people, how do I recruit them, those kind of things. And the single best way to progress with this is to talk to other people who've done it, or even share stories. Talking about networking, there are quite a few. I've got a typo. It's the Federal Transit Administration. US Transit has quite a lot of networking, not least because the FTA actually requires asset management in return for any federal funding, TRB asset management, APTA subcommittees. Another place to look if you're American is that there are some very well-established Canadian networks. The CNAM, the Canadian Network of Asset Managers, AM Ontario, and all the other things which actually are in place to support, in particular, the fact that the province of Ontario requires asset management in all municipalities. CIATI Asset Management Network, particularly on generation, does some great work. And there is the Institute of Asset Management, which has local branches, actually quite a lot of branches now across North America. Ones I've had anything much to do with are things like Pacific Northwest and New York. So it's worth having a look to see if there's a local group for you. So the first thing you want to do is kind of start networking. All right, so conclusions so far. We're all on an asset management journey, but this is what I would conclude from here. First of all, good asset management is always going to be worth it. The better you are at asset management, managing your physical assets, the better your organization is going to be run. It's got to be worth the effort we put into it. But it never just happens. It needs both resources and leadership. Okay, so that is really what I want to talk about, and then open up to questions. I think there is a whole other topic for another time, which is building up both our skills if we're an asset management lead and the skills of our teams, and that's an ongoing conversation as well. All right, and not least, okay, this is my troop of platypuses, think leadership, because it's going to take a bit of that. Okay, so I'm opening up to questions. We do have a free quick asset management maturity survey that we will send you the links after this ends if you're interested in where you are now. Just to say thanks to everybody who was involved in writing building an asset management team, and here is where you get a copy. So, questions?
Sure, Ruth. Yes, we do have a good amount of questions flowing through the presentation as you were speaking. You have answered a couple of questions that people have asked already, and you answered the question about the skills that are needed in the asset management team. But Jerry asked a follow-up question to that. Given the advancement in technology and the expectations for staff that accompany maturing organizational capabilities, what kind of new skills are you expecting a successful asset management or asset management manager should have in the future?
Okay, this is presupposing they already have leadership skills and people management skills and relationship building skills, that they are themselves fairly business savvy, they understand what their organization, okay, we're assuming all of that, and obviously that's not trivial. New skills, I think the one I would say in particular is, do you remember I was saying that asset management in the end has to be based on that understanding between what's the relationship between what we do to the assets, like what maintenance, when we replace them, how we build and design them, and what we actually deliver for our customers. And that, of course, is modeling. That's how it doesn't have to be complicated models that you buy very expensively, but they probably will become more and more sophisticated, whether it's whole life cost models, risk models, capital program optimization models. So I would say that I can see that ability, the modeling skills, which is not my particular strength, actually. I've always thought that I'm good with the people and I can see what we want to do, and working with somebody who's really is a good modeler. Now, that isn't necessarily found in things like engineering. Some very successful asset management organizations have hired people from very numerate disciplines. so economics, advanced physics, people who really will have analytic and numeracy skills to a high level. So I think that's going to become ever more important. Now, you don't want get the tail and the dog the wrong way around. If you don't have the right relationships, if you don't have the right culture, if you don't have the buy-in from the top, the modelling won't really help you. But the modelling can really is where we want to go, and actually a model that shows people dynamically, if you don't spend the money to replace these assets, this is what's going to happen to your risk to level of service to your customers, can be quite an effective tool for making people think that it's probably quite important to spend money. No, so I think that's where I'd go. Those analytic, data science, modelling tools, I think, are going to become ever more important. Does that, yeah.
Yes.
You notice I didn't say knowing about all the hardware. There are lots of people around who will love new hardware. We don't have to do that in the asset management team. That's not really what our job is. That we have to keep on top as an organisation of where technology is going, of course. Okay, sorry, Andres.
No, we have another question from Bruce, and he asks, what can you do when you do not get to select your asset management team? The participants in this program were assigned by different departments.
Yes. Well, I'm going to, obviously, what can I say? It's a problem. Now, I think a good thing about other departments offering up people is if they're offering them saying, we all want to be involved and therefore we want our people involved. Now, that might be a very positive thing. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes they give us the people they can't think what else to do with, and sometimes they work out and sometimes they don't. But I think part of what I'm trying to say here is we probably need to start saying that asset management does require certain sorts of skills, and it does require certain sorts of commitment. It's hard work. A team will have to work very, very hard, and they'll have to be very keen. I mean, they'll have to really believe that asset management's worth doing. And if the people you have don't really care about asset management, don't really know about it, and don't really bring many, what can we say, willingness and skills to the party, we have to ask the question, if we don't get what we need, we don't get the people, what can we do with what we've got? And I think that's, asset management is always a practical thing. What can you do with what you've got? Where can we start? But it doesn't make my heart sing to think that we don't have any adult conversation about what kind of people we need and what kind of skills, how we have to develop them, how we have to reward them, for example. It doesn't make me think, well, we'll just make, well, okay, you get where I'm going here, Bruce. I realise that not everybody's going to get the resources, but I think there's been some successes, where people have started small and where they have got a couple of good people that they know they can trust. They can build from there. I've also known some grim examples in North America of teams which were totally dysfunctional, and you just felt that they were somewhere to put people that nobody else actually wanted to manage. I hope I'm being much too cynical, Bruce. I hope that's not your situation. The fact that other departments want to be involved has got to be a good thing. I mean, as opposed to the opposite, which is they don't want their people involved, which is another problem. So.
Right. And I have a question from Kathy saying, do you think there is a business model where when you have too many individuals dedicated to the facilitation and coordination of asset management?
Too many people involved?
Yes, too many people.
Oh, you mean too many different people doing their own thing, I guess. I'm going to assume, Kathy, if you want to say some more, Andres can pick it up. If too many people, too many cooks in too many departments thinking they're doing it, I don't know many situations where that's true. And I have to, I never quite know how to take this. I ran an asset management team in Sydney, in what's now Sydney Trains, and they had been doing asset management for a long time. They were a very early adopter, and they had some extremely good things. I mean, brilliant asset information and very, very good asset management planning. And not because I said so, but because of how they built that up over time in individual teams. My job was then to bring them all together and see what was missing. We ended up with 90 people, and they were all busy. They were all busy: asset management planning, asset strategies, training and communications, reliability modeling, supporting asset information. So I don't think too many people per se is a problem. But if I'm being a bit cynical, if we've got too many people who think their job is to do facilitation and change management instead of some of the content of asset management, that can be a problem. A content-free change management, we can pick up good skills from skilled change managers, but asset management, you have to be thinking about what asset management itself takes. It's not particularly soft and fluffy, I'd say, asset management. But I'm intrigued, Kathy, to hear how people could end up with lots of people doing facilitation. I can imagine it. Yeah.
She did mention now that that's exactly what she's asking, and that there are too many areas that think they are responsible, like in brackets, responsible.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess that's a product of a bit of success, is that if asset management seems to be the thing to do, everybody claims they're an asset manager. I think you probably know what I think about that. You're not just an asset manager because you declare yourself an asset manager. You have to actually do the hard work to find out about asset management and develop asset management skills. So everybody thinking that they're doing it because it sounds good obviously isn't a particularly adult way of doing it. But I'll put a plea here to go back to the asset management system, that quality system for asset management, where roles and responsibilities must be fairly clearly laid out. Not having clear roles and responsibilities isn't good in any area of the business, but it's no good in asset management either. So one of the key things, if you were picking up, even you're not interested in being certified as asset for ISO 55000, but it's worth picking up that thinking of, we do have to work out who's responsible for what, who's accountable for what. And I mean, it's a typical conversation I have had with places where everybody thinks they're doing planning. And when you actually look at what they're doing, they're planning this bit, but they think they're doing everything. And that takes a bit of teasing apart and going, no, actually planning is how all of these things come together. And it requires, it's like, let's not fight who's going to do it, but somebody has to do the hard work of actually doing it. So it just seems a little unsophisticated, but I mean, not necessarily negative that people think asset management's a good thing to claim, but I think we have to start saying, I mean, you can't just declare yourself an electrical engineer or gas engineer. You kind of are expected to have learned something. I don't know. I probably shouldn't go down that track any further, but I would say if you've really got lots of very confused responsibilities, that looks like a job for the asset management system, and making use of something like ISO 55000. And where I've seen chaos of responsibilities, I just itch to get in there and go, let's just write it down. Take the clauses of ISO 55000 and actually look to see who's really responsible for these, who's responsible at the moment, who should be responsible, and how they interact with each other. So does that help? I hope. It probably doesn't help the pain, but I think that's why we need the asset management system.
Thank you, Ruth. I have another question, and this is from Christopher. Let's say that you need to justify the asset management coordinator and other team members to senior management. What return on investment justification points can you include in your business case?
Okay, now this is a very typical question, and I've had that conversation with a couple of people even this week. The problem can I just say that if an organization is asking how they could immediately cut maintenance spending by implementing asset management, that's not part of the solution, that's part of the problem. Short-term cuts without actually thinking about long-term implications is the problem asset management is trying to address. It's certainly not where you want to encourage people. So what we tend to say is that unless you have really good reason to think that you are wasting money in operations and maintenance. I mean, many organizations have cut operations and maintenance to the bone over the last few years. So unless you have really good reason to think that you've got people sitting around idle and doing the wrong things, which is not usually my experience, and that you think there's something you can do about it, I would never offer up, this is just my opinion, I would never offer up immediate operations and maintenance savings. Because when you think through what you really need to do to deliver the level of service to customers, you may find that you've got too few people, that you're running unacceptably high risks, that your assets are failing more than they should, that your customers are not very happy. Asset management really aims to right-size things like maintenance. What's the work we need to do, and what kind of people and how many of them do we need? However, if I had to put a little wager on it, I would predict that most organizations could save an enormous amount of money on capital spending by optimizing when and why we replace our assets and thinking very carefully before we launch in to new technologies without really thinking about what they're going to cost us overall. I'm pretty confident that if I were given free rein, I could save millions in any organization on capital. The problem is that most organizations think that they want to spend more capital and want to save on operating costs. But it's just not quite the right question. In the end, you will end up not spending money that you don't need to on things like maintenance because of that right sizing. But an immediate short-term cut is like the opposite of good asset management. An immediate short-term cut without thinking what that might mean in 10 years' time is the opposite of good asset management. I don't think it's difficult. There are all kinds of things you can save through doing good asset management. Insurance premiums, anybody? Insurance companies of their own free will started offering, not just in Australia and Europe, but here as well, started offering cheaper premiums to people that they knew were good at asset management. Because if we had solid asset management processes and asset management system in place, that proved that we were much more conscious and aware and managing our risks. And the insurance people who really understand about risk spotted a real opportunity there. So there are lots of things you could save, but be careful about what you think you're going to save. In the end, you save because you don't do stupid things. You don't waste money. You don't do things you don't have to. And that will, in the end, just as, not that I don't know where Krista is from, if you were a private company listed on the stock exchange, there's very good evidence to say that a company that's very good at asset management will have higher share prices and higher profits. So there's some very, very solid things to say, but just be careful about saying immediate maintenance savings. I'd love other people's opinions. I know we can't have everybody. I bet there are people out there wanting to jump in with this, but so it's not difficult. I mean, I'm happy to talk more about that. There are lots and lots of benefits of asset management. It's not difficult to spell out the benefits. ISO 55000 actually lays out what they are, and it's right. All these things good things will happen to you. Bond ratings, anybody? Asset management can help you with that. I hope that helps. Okay, how are we doing, Andres?
Thank you, Ruth. We have one last question. And this is from Chaminda asking, is it possible for someone who is subject matter expert to work for the asset management team on a part-time basis to lend their expertise?
Well, it might not be quite the right question. Do we need the subject matter experts involved in things like the asset class strategies and the asset planning process? So things like prioritizing what we should be replacing and refurbishing. The answer is yes, yes, and more yes. So subject matter experts must be involved. Whether they're best in the asset management team, the problem is the asset management team isn't really called upon to be subject matter experts in specific assets, so specific classes, specific systems. They're not called on to be expert engineers because the asset management team's being asked to do something else, and it's hard enough to do it without also having to worry about keeping up your technical expertise. My preference would actually be the working relationships that the small asset management team builds the relationships with the subject matter experts to make use of the subject matter expertise that must be used. We must pull in the subject matter experts into those processes. That would probably be how I'd put it. So it's not really saying, can they be involved? They must be. But whether they're also involved in thinking about the planning processes and the culture change and the putting the asset management system in place, I guess it depends on how interested they are in those things.
Perfect, Ruth. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Yes,
See you on
thank
the
you.
next webinar.